So Rabbi Sharon Bruce writes about an ancient Jewish practice from Second Temple Judaism. He says that several times a year, hundreds of thousands of Jews would ascend to Jerusalem, the center of Jewish religious and political life. And they would climb up the steps to the temple. And then they would enter this enormous plaza. And then they would all turn and start circling the plaza clockwise in mass. And then the brokenhearted and the mourners and anyone who was feeling lonely or sick or had something to grieve, they would make the exact same ritual climb, but instead of turning and going clockwise, they would turn and they would start to circle counterclockwise. So 2 circles, each circling in the opposite direction together. And each person, as they would encounter another person face to face, would stop. And the person who was walking clockwise would stop and look the person who was in pain, walking counterclockwise, in the eyes. They would see them. And they would say, why does your heart ache? And the person would reply what was going on with them, like maybe my father died and I didn't get to say goodbye, or maybe my partner left and I was completely blindsided by it. And those who were walking clockwise would offer a blessing to them. May the Holy One comfort you. You are not alone. May the Holy One comfort you. You are not alone. This timeless wisdom, says Rabbi Bruce, speaks to what it means to be human in a world of pain. Because, as the rabbi says, this year you may walk the path of the anguished, but perhaps next year it will be you who gets to walk and offer comfort. Because we hold each other's broken hearts and then we offer them to each other for comfort in our turns. So what does it mean to be a human in a world of pain? And how do we make our way through this world together as best that we can? And most importantly, what is it that we can do for each other when things get broken between people? I think all of these readings today are approaching those questions from some angle or another. And I think it's because pretty much every culture and every society struggles to figure these things out. Sometimes we build up lists of do's and don'ts. We have expectations and prohibitions for our human interactions, and we have rituals and traditions, like the one that was described here this morning, to help us to navigate all of the joys and the sorrows of living, loving, and striving together. Now, in our day, just witness the popularity of advice columns. Anyone else out there like to read the advice columns besides me? I love it. I'm looking at Matthew, I know he does too.
Guilty pleasure, I like reading Reddit.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I hadn't thought of that one. See, the thing is, when we read those columns, I think it's great because you feel like I'm not the only one that has difficulties in my various relationships in life, whether it be spouse, parent, sibling, adult children, boss, friend, or your brother-in-law's new girlfriend's kid that the whole family can't figure out how to deal with at Thanksgiving because they're a little bit, wild. Now, my personal favorite advice columnist is Caroline Hacks. She writes for the Washington Post. And I feel like she gives a lot of good, sound advice, but she does it with incredible compassion. Now, I've noticed, because I have been reading her for a couple of years now, that generally the people that write to her are in one of two camps. First of all, there's the folks who write in because they're sure that they are right. Like, I need to tell my daughter-in-law that when her kids come over, they must be wearing patent leather shoes. I mean, isn't that what all kids should do when they come visit their grandparents? And they might have been told by someone in their life that perhaps this approach is not the best way to build a strong relationship and loving relationship with whatever family member we're talking about here. And what the writer really wants is for Carolyn to tell them that they are in fact right. And what they end up getting, which is kind of nice, is a gentle nudge, though not always, the level of gentleness depends on kind of the level of tone deafness in the writer's letter. But they're being, encouraged. Rethink things with a bit more compassion and a clearer sense of what the boundaries are in your relationships. So that's group one. Very satisfying because you get to look at it and be like, I could have told them that, right? But then there's the folks that write in with absolutely no idea what to do. They're unhappy or frustrated or hurt or feel like something in their vital relationship of some sort or other is just broken and they can't figure it out. So they describe what's happening and they just ask, what should I do, Carolyn? How do I fix this? Now, I'd say these are the ones that I get the most out of because Carolyn's answers aren't simple, sort of like, you wake up, honey. Here's what you need to do. Carolyn's actually, she's really gentle with the people who write into her. And she says things like, here's what I hear you saying, and you sound like you're questioning this. So, your instinct, I would listen to that. Or, I hear in here something that your instinct's telling you that you're not quite hearing. And, sit with that a little bit more. Carolyn's careful because sometimes she suggests ways that things could be fixed, but she is not afraid to say when it seems like our relationship is just too broken. So here is how, in fact, you take care of each other and yourself as you end things. Carolyn sticks to some real important basics that I really appreciate too. Like, everyone has feelings, and they are real, and that includes the letter writer and the person that's being talked about, or the family members that are being talked about. And she says that everyone is meant to be treated like they mattered, with care and dignity. And finally, trust is key. Trust is sacred. And if trust is shattered, it can be very difficult to rebuild. So often that's kind of at the crux of how she helps people think through what's going on in their relationships. Let's face it, not everyone out there is so kind and open-hearted about the types of struggles that pretty much everyone goes through when we are navigating all the relationships in our lives. I mean, we've heard them all, voices out there that are getting shouty, judgmental, and dare I say preachy. They want to spar instead of look at things with compassion and decide whether something is right or wrong. And let's face it, people in relationships, they're not quite that simple, are they? So, think of some of the intricacies of human relationships that we are busy shouting about today. Do we actually think that it helps make the hurt and the loss and the pain of our struggles to forge connection and family and community any better if we're just shouting about them? I don't think so. But it doesn't seem to stop people using these kinds of struggles and issues as if there was a test that you can pass. Like it's this sort of gotcha thing. Because relationships, they spur those types of questions that seem to become contentious and polarizing. And they love to use them, some people love to use them, to get someone to make a public answer that's likely to have them offend one group of people or another, no matter which side of the question they come down on. Because let's face it, there is no simple right or wrong for this kind of stuff. So, remembering the opening of today's gospel, it seems like that's what's going on with Jesus here today. Now, the Pharisees approach him, right? And it even says there, it tells us, they came to him because they wanted to test him. People in Jesus' day, they had strong and diverse opinions about all of this stuff, just like we do. And we get to meet Jesus, if you look across all the different Gospels, we get to meet Jesus debating with religious leaders over topics like marriage, parenting, sibling relationships, the care of your servants, just to name a few of the different types of intimate human connection that get talked through in the Gospels. And if we expand out into letters, you can get more of a sense of how the early Christian community was struggling with a bunch of this stuff too. But diverse and strongly held opinions, just like today. The topic for this gospel reading from Mark's gospel is divorce. So, you know, not contentious at all. You can tell that that group of Pharisees think that it will be easy to trap Jesus into saying something that's going to make him unpopular, because, you know, that's what they want to do. They want to kind of get him to lose face with the crowds that he's drawing. And they do this by making a simple binary. Is it right or is it wrong for a man to divorce his wife? Well, Jesus does what Jesus often does, which is to flip the question back on the people who ask him. And so Jesus says, is there provision for divorce in the Torah? And yes, there definitely is. It's right there in the book of Deuteronomy, among other places. And so Jesus is like, well, there you go then. It's in Torah. But then Jesus, he kind of encourages them to think more broadly. You know what else is in Torah, says Jesus? God's expressed intentions from the beginning. Go right back to the beginning, to Genesis. That we enter into some sort of intimate, committed connection with another human being, between two people, with the best of intentions, with the best intentions to care for and value each other in the same way that we would care for and value ourselves. As if they're our own flesh, right? Our own flesh. Like it's part of our very being. And you know what? Isn't that what we all strive for? Isn't that what I think just about every couple who sets out on a committed relationship together, that's their intention. But you know what? Human relationships of every sort are challenging. And sometimes we figure out how to make them work. And sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we can't keep it going. It's just not helpful for all the people involved. I think Jesus goes there with us. Now, it's hard because this is a pretty, the translation itself is very stark. But biblical scholar Matt Skinner points out that in fact that word that Jesus is using when he starts to talk about adultery and divorce and separation and all of that is not the traditional word for divorce. It's actually using a softer term that talks about broken relationships in general. In other words, Jesus is taking the conversation out of the realm of the legal, what's the minimum that we have to do here, into the realm of the pastoral. Like relationships break. How do we navigate through this? They're sacred, they're important. We have the best intentions to treat each other with all the love that we give ourselves, but also they don't always work out that way. Jesus is answering those set of questions for us. What does it mean to be human in a world of pain? Well, we all share these burdens and struggles. And how do we make our way through it together as best we can? Just do our best to love others as we love ourselves, no matter where we are in that struggle, and that'll help. But most importantly, what can we do for each other when things are broken between people? Well, we need to see and acknowledge the full humanity in each other and to make the choices that are life-giving for all that are involved. Life-giving for all involved. And in particular, Jesus, I think, is pointing out that we remember the vulnerable in the equation, because we all know that there's fallout when relationships don't work the way they're supposed to. In other words, I think Jesus is encouraging everyone to strive in our closest relationships the best that we are capable of. Aim for that mutual self-giving, which, I mean, are we surprised? Jesus talks about this in almost every kind of relationship we have in the world. And not to just aim for that level of what can I get away with and still be seen as okay. But Jesus also acknowledges that it's not easy. Jesus is looking at all of this with deep care and compassion for all of these kinds of struggles. Now, ironically, many people since then have used passages like this to shame people whose marriages did not work out. They've used this gotcha that was used against Jesus in harmful ways. They've used it to force people to stay in relationships that were harmful, and they have used it to deny the potential for loving and giving relationships that can be formed in new ways after ones that needed to end have ended. Now, I know you all know this. Jesus' time, things were very different then. Marriage was a completely different institution in many ways. The structure of the family was really different then. The economics were different. The roles for people in all of the different situations and the hierarchy and everything that plays out were different. But you know what wasn't different? People. People hungered for and strived for intimate and loving friendships, families, and partnerships. That was true then, and it is true today. We seek connection and community. We want to be loved, and we want to be able to love. It is not always easy, and it does not always work out. We all struggle. Every relationship struggles. And sometimes we manage to figure it out and endure. Other times, relationships need to end. And I think this particular passage is a perfect example of why the Bible is not just a manual full of pat answers. Do this, don't do that, and you will be righteous. That is not how the Bible works. The Bible's a library of stories. There's stories that give us all sorts of ways to navigate with care and compassion the things that are the messiest and most challenging and most fundamental to being human. So let's circle back to that opening story about that ancient ritual of the two circles going in opposite directions and people stopping and looking at each other. I think when we just ask, what can I get away with? Like, what's legal or whatever, what's the minimum standard that I have to uphold? It's like we all turned in the same direction in that circle. And we're just all sort of trotting along in one direction, looking at each other's backs. And we're in it alone, right? But when we turn and we look at each other and exercise our compassion towards each other and ask things like, why does your heart ache? Then I think we can listen with true compassion in our hearts, and we can truly offer a blessing. May the Holy One comfort you. And most importantly, we can say to people, you are not alone in this. And I think we can trust that some years we may walk the path of the English, but then perhaps other years we will be able to be in the group that is holding the brokenhearted and assuring them that they're not